Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à...
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our meeting of the Board of Internal Economy. This is meeting number 23, and we will be starting. I hope everyone is in the room, that we do have quorum to start the meeting.
Of the previous meeting, I know that members have had the opportunity to take a look at the minutes, and I see Mr. Julian has a point to raise. Mr. Julian.
Juste sur la question de...
Regarding the meeting that we had before, we discussed renovations of Center Block and the ongoing construction. We learned that 21 decisions had to be made by Christmas, so it's kind of disturbing. I think it's concerning for everyone here. I would like to know if plans have been made as to when we'll be able to discuss that and endorse those decisions, because it's urgent. As we agreed during the meeting we had a few days ago, we will come back to those issues when we meet on the 23rd of November. After that, it's not all decisions, all 21 decisions that have to be done all in one go, but during our next meeting, I think it's on the 9th of December, if I'm not mistaken, we'll do that.
Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un qui...
Does somebody want to move that we approve the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Finley. No objection.
To business arising from the minutes. Any other issues? Seeing none, then would anyone... Do I assume that we have consensus to... Is there any dissonance to adopting, to moving on to the next issue? Seeing none. Moving on to then the interpretation report, j'aimerais inviter Monsieur...
I would like to call on Mr. Laporte and his team to come for their presentation.
La parole est à vous, Monsieur Laporte.
You have the floor, Mr. Laporte. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I must acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I would like to acknowledge Cecilia, Lillian, Alison, who are interpreting this meeting, and I would also like to thank Matthew Ball, Vice President of Services to Parliament and Interpretation, for representing the Translation Bureau with me today. Mr. Chair, I would first of all like to congratulate you on your appointment as Speaker of the House of Commons. As you know, the Translation Bureau of Public Services and Procurement Canada is a key component of the services provided for parliamentarians, and you can count on us. This support goes through interpretation, today's topic. The Translation Bureau has gone above and beyond to meet the House of Commons interpretation needs, and we thank the Board of Internal Economy's honorable members for giving us the opportunity to provide an update on the situation. As I have already said in the past, there are two closely linked aspects to the current state of interpretation services: the health and safety of interpreters and interpretation capacity. In both cases, I am pleased to report that we have made significant progress since June.
And safety of interpreters, our prime concern. As you may know, Mr. Chair, Employment and Social Development Canada's Labour Programme issued two directions to the Transition Bureau in February. On August 25th, the Labour Programme investigator closed a direction stating she was satisfied that the Bureau complied with the requirement of the Canada Labour Code and the Canada Occupational Health and Safety Regulation. This outcome was made possible thanks to the Translation Bureau's unflagging efforts, along with the invaluable cooperation of the House Administration and a group of sound and hearing experts. Together, the Bureau and the House Administration put in place a comprehensive series of protocols regarding the microphone used by virtual participants in order to provide a sound environment that is conducive to interpretation. They also obtained sound analysis from experts at the National Research Council of Canada, Western University, and the University of Ottawa. This positive development does not mean that the health and safety issues are behind us, and we must all remain vigilant. Some incidents, such as Larsen effect or audio feedbacks, continue to be reported from time to time at in-person meetings. Simple action like keeping earpieces away from the microphone are helpful in avoiding these type of issues. It is also to be noted that we continue to provide the labor program investigator with monthly progress updates on the efforts made by the Bureau to better protect its interpreters. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, honorable members of the Board of Internal Economy, for your ongoing support. As whips, leaders, and influential members of your parties, you help ensure that your colleagues are aware of, and also, most importantly, that they apply interpreters' protection measure, and that they demonstrate understanding and support when interpreters need to interrupt their services to avoid injury. We have everything to gain by protecting interpreters, first and foremost on a human level, but also on an operational level to maintain our interpretation capacity. Nous avons eu récemment un excellent exemple de...
We recently saw a perfect example of this relationship between improving interpreters' working conditions and interpretation capacity when a number of freelance interpreters decided to work longer hours instead of limiting themselves to the reduced working hours in effect since the pandemic. A labor management advisory group is currently looking into that matter for our staff interpreters. This is one development that may lead to an increase in our capacity. For the time being, our capacity remains stable at pre-pandemic volumes, which in itself is an accomplishment in the current context where we have injured interpreters and labor shortage. That said, we are making significant progress with our efforts to meet the desire by honorable MPs to prolong meetings and increase their number. Among other things, we were able to slightly expand our inventory of freelance interpreters this summer, thanks to the organization for the first time of a second accreditation exam in the same year, and we issued a call for tenders to renew our freelance interpretation contracts. Since freelancers do not work exclusively for us and their availabilities vary, bringing in this new blood has not yet translated into a noticeable increase in our capacity. However, we hope that other steps we take, like the accreditation exam in November, to be held tomorrow, will help us achieve our goal. Of course, we need to keep in mind that the pool of active conference interpreters in Canada is very limited. The handful of new graduates who join the pool each year is not enough to offset those who retire. We are thus unable to achieve a net gain in capacity each time we issue a new call for tenders or hold a new accreditation exam.
We are still in talks with universities to expand the teaching of conference interpretation beyond the 2 universities that currently offer programs in Canada. We have been having promising discussion with 2 Quebec universities in this regard. Also, we are working with the language industry to encourage people of all age to consider a career in interpretation, and we are dealing with a recruitment firm to find new interpreters. Lastly, I know that you are very interested in the pilot project intended to enable interpreters located outside the National Capital Region to interpret for Parliament. Let me assure that we are continuing to work hard on this with the House administration. So, Mr. Chair, honorable members of the Board of Internal Economy, I hope that this update shows how the Bureau is leaving no stone unturned to maintain and eventually boost its capacity while protecting its interpreters in an effort to better meet your needs. So Mathieu and I are now at your disposal to take your question. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Laporte. Avant qu'on parle...
Thank you very much, Mr. Laporte. Before we start with questions and answers, I would like to ask Mr. MacDonald if he has some comments before we move on to questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 points to share with the board today. First of all, I would like to talk about the last virtual committee dashboard. I would like to talk about the pilot project for remote simultaneous interpretation that Mr. Laporte just mentioned. Members have received the dashboard. The virtual dashboard shows stabilization of the main data points that we use to assess the results of our efforts. We note that committee meetings are going on with least interruptions. It's true that problems still arise from time to time, but we've seen that when witnesses are properly equipped and tested, there are greater chances for them to participate with less interruptions.
The result of the considerable investments made by the House and our ongoing partnership with our colleagues at the Translation Bureau. We've been reviewing existing procedures and have the teams in place to make sure we can continuously meet the requirements for supporting meetings with remote participants in a way that meets the requirements of today. For example, considerable efforts continue to be made by the House team to onboard all virtual witnesses by equipping them with approved headsets and scheduling them for pre-tests to validate their setup prior to their appearance before a committee. Further resources are on hand during every meeting to coordinate, initiate, operate, monitor, and support the video conference portion. These resources help, among other things, facilitate the technical and audio tests with all virtual participants and the interpreters immediately before each meeting. Teams supporting meetings, including interpreters, also work together to share their observations, collect information on issues, and ensure a follow-up when required. La Chambre s'est engagée dans un
The House has started a process to continue improvements and will continue to work with the Translation Bureau to identify possibilities for improvement to support the work of the committee. Mr. Laporte just mentioned, for example, the work we are doing on the lasting effects. There's a team working to see how we can improve the situation. Right now, if I may, I would move on to remote interpretation. The pilot project. During the last meeting of the board, we were asked to provide an update on the pilot project. As Mr. Laporte mentioned a few minutes ago, the Translation Bureau worked very hard on this file, has been doing so for the past few months. This pilot project will allow Translation Bureau accredited bureau interpreters outside the National Capital Region to provide services. This was used for the first time in April. Furthermore, in addition, additional tests were conducted over the past months. We continued testing and simulations. The service has been used 19 times with success for non-broadcast and non-parliamentary meetings. But over the past few weeks, teams have also participated with simulations dealing with real committee meetings to make sure that everything works well technically and that the requirements of the Translation Bureau are met. So the objective is that this service be as transparent as possible for meeting participants.
Administration will be reaching out to the party whips to propose an implementation schedule to bring this service online for regular committee meetings. It is proposed that this begin on November 20th, which is to say upon return from the upcoming constituency week. Initially, we propose to have one RSI meeting a day between Monday and Thursday, providing support to a regularly scheduled committee from the existing schedule. For the initial rollout, it is felt that the best option for committees is to choose best option for the whips is to choose specific committees that will regularly use this service. This way, the interpreters will be familiar with the committee and the content, and members will more quickly become familiar with the service. In the coming weeks, a second RSI meeting would be planned on the same days to maximize the use of the available these new interpretation resources. What does this mean in terms of capacity? Ultimately, this will bring 2 new meeting slots per day from Monday to Thursday, thereby adding 8 potential new meeting slots to the committee event schedule. From now until the winter adjournment, it is recommended that this new capacity be used mostly to bring some needed flexibility to the existing committee schedule and to help reduce cancellations due to meetings that require extra time, occasional extra meetings, late sittings of the House, and when available, to use the existing in-person teams to support other activities that have less access to interpretation resources at the present time, including regional caucuses, interparliamentary events, and other events. As just one example, currently when the board meets on Thursday mornings, like it is this morning, a committee in the same meeting block needs to be canceled. With the new RSI pilot project going forward, it would not be necessary to cancel a committee meeting when the board meets. En tout cas, ces décisions reviendront.
These decisions will be to be taken by whips in the weeks to come, and the House administration is prepared to give whips the necessary information and support to effectively use all of the resources available. Thank you very much, Chair, and we're prepared to take your questions now. Thank you very much, Mr. MacDonald. Mr. Laporte, I've already opened up the speaking list of people who would like to intervene. There's Mr. Julian, then Mr. Gerritsen, and then Ms. de Bellefeuille. First of all, Mr. Julian. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. I have some questions to put First of all, it's true that everyone has really pulled out all the stops over the last few months in order to reduce the number of accidents. Of course, that's fundamental. We've already said on several occasions that without interpreters, there's no parliament in Canada. So their work really is essential. And I am happy to see that progress has been made. I think the clerks of committees, the chairs of the committees, everyone has worked together to reduce this. But as you have said, work accidents are still occurring. So which other measures are you planning to take so we can reach a no-zero accident working environment?
Pour la question, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. I would say there's several. There are many measures that have already been taken over the last 6 months. So we do see a notable reduction in the number of incidents reported to us. Of course, each stroke incident is one too many, and we want to reduce this. Will we have a zero-risk environment one day? I don't think so. Before the pandemic, we had certain incidents with in-person meetings, so we have to bear that in mind. We're working closely with our partners here and with Ian and his team so that each time an incident occurs, we try and get to the source of the matter. We've beefed up our protocols in terms of the mics and selecting the right headset for interpreters. We're also working with audiologists on all this. So it's a continuous improvement program that's underway. We'll continue to work with experts as well in terms of sound to see what can be done. That's our approach. There's no magical solution or no step that would say we can remove many of these incidents. There's the question of Larsen effect. We've been able to accomplish a great deal in all of this. So those are the main prongs of our approach, and perhaps I can turn to Mr. Ball to give a bit more context, perhaps. Thank you. Mr. Laporte has just described all of the efforts that the Bureau has been pursuing. We are basing ourselves on acoustic and audiology experts. Reports are continually underway. We're also working closely with the House administration. They are continuing with their own tests on the comprehensiveness of their audio system. So I think a great deal of progress has already been made. As Dominique has said, there will always be risks. There were risks even pre-pandemic, but we're optimistic that we're on the right track to reduce the number of incidents as we've observed over the last few months. Thank you very much. Second question on the management union consultations. Do you have a date for these consultation groups? Is it coming up soon or more in the medium term? Thank you very much for that question. It's a group that started dealing with this matter over the summer. So far, we've had 7 or 8 meetings that have been very productive between the management, the labour management side, and with interpreters, we're trying to reach a friendly settlement. So we don't have a specific timeline, but I would say discussions are continuing. Good progress has been made. And we're trying to explore a range of options. Sometimes we also have to take a case-by-case approach. Not all interpreters in the same situation. Certain interpreters have already been injured, so it's not one easy solution to go back to normal working hours. But we've had very productive, fruitful discussions, and it's certainly not going to stretch out for 2 or 3 years. On both sides, there is a desire to accelerate this process. Thank you. You've referred to an accreditation exam that took place this summer, if I've correctly understood. How many candidates came to take this exam and how actually passed this successfully? And also there's another accreditation exam taking place tomorrow. So how many candidates have come forward for that second accreditation exam? Thank you, Chair, for that question. I imagined that you were going to put that question to me. So in terms of the accreditation exam in June, we had less people who signed up. We had 30 people who had signed up for that. We are 4 candidates who have succeeded. So we had a lower rate of success. The reason for this is that many people who were retaking the exam, perhaps for a second time, and it was the first time we were organising this in June, but basically we were able to bring in 3 new candidates who were successful. And then for the exam tomorrow, we've got 57 people who have signed up to take that accreditation one. 57 candidates. So on this item, I've understood that interpreters are doing enormous high-quality work. And I understand that the success rate will be lower given the very high-level requirements. But if we're referring to 38 who took the exam and 4 who succeeded, and then another 57 candidates tomorrow, are these other candidates close to passing the exam? Can the success rate actually be increased with more training? Or which criteria would allow us to actually explain this low success rate, at least 90% that didn't pass, and we hope it'll be higher tomorrow? We don't want to reduce quality. That has to be maintained. But sometimes we can actually lift up certain candidates with other accompanying measures. So what are the problems and which solutions are you exploring to increase the pass rate? I'll start and then perhaps Mr. Ball can jump in. Of course, we're working closely with candidates who were close to passing. We see that they have skills to really become Translation Bureau interpreters. So these people receive training from us because they know they're close to making it. We hope they're going to pass the next time. We also have many prep workshops for candidates. There was one that took place in October, I believe, another one back in June, to make sure that candidates are ready. We don't want to trick them with an exam, quite the opposite, but we want to make sure they have the necessary skills to meet the very strict requirements that apply within the House. We don't want to compromise on quality ever. And we have our managerial interpreters who are on that committee as well to make sure that interpreters meet our criteria. But perhaps you could add something, Matthew, if you allow me to do so, Chair. Yes, the number of candidates that actually pass the exam just gives part of the overall picture. When we hold these exams, we give information, preparatory sessions for the candidates, for those who want to take the exam, that helps them to get the high score possible and really perform as well as they can. But when we assess the candidates, that gives us an opportunity to identify promising candidates, and we continue our efforts with them. We contact them after the exam, and often we can hire candidates who haven't passed the exam, but we can hire them as trainee interpreters, stagiaires. That way we can work closely with them. These are candidates that are perhaps not quite up to our expectations yet, and we bear in mind the real working circumstances for interpreters at the Parliament of Canada. We require of them the quality that you need, of course, to complete your work. So over and above those who pass the exam, there are things that happen in the background, if you like, to increase the number of candidates and make sure that we have people who are there to actually allow us to support you in your efforts. Thank you. I'm very happy to hear that because we have the best interpreters in the world here. And we have to maintain this high quality. But of course, training is helpful. It can make a real difference. So thank you on that. Then a final question on the pilot project. How many interpreters from outside the National Capital Region have actually participated in this pilot project? And have there been any technical problems that have been resolved thanks to this pilot project? And then a personal question, are there any interpreters from BC participating in this pilot project? Chair, I'll turn to Matthew to take that question, please. Yes, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you. There's around 10 interpreters who offer this service outside the facilities on the hill. I'd need to check for BC. I don't want to mislead you. But this is a pilot project that we're working on with the House Administration. It's going well. We expect that there may be some little bumps along the way, but with our work so far, we've been able to make improvements already and sort out these little wrinkles and bumps along the way. Mark Gertson.
I am new to the to BOIE, so I apologize if this has been covered in the past. But I listened attentively to the discussion around or the comments that you made around the earpieces and the feedback that they can provide. And I know that I've been guilty of that in the House, absolutely. And but the problem extends beyond just the individual who's speaking, because as you would know, when the microphone turns on, it's usually for two desks. And so if somebody at one of the other desks had happened to leave their microphone in that area, the feedback is going to occur. And sometimes it takes a while to figure it out. But my question is more regarding the technology of it. There must be technology out there, whether through a different style microphone or something, that would limit that feedback, isn't there? I mean, I think that that is a serious hazard to interpretation services, and something that can seriously affect somebody's hearing if they're subject to that. Does that technology not exist, and has it ever been explored to utilize it in the House?
Mr. Awiti.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you a lot for the question. So my name is Yassine Ouidi. I'm responsible for the audiovisual technologies here for the House of Commons, including these committee rooms and the chamber. And as such, yes, we always explore solutions, trying to find solutions with regards to feedback. Feedback occur naturally when there's an audio source that's exposed to a microphone, and such as this case of this earpiece and this specific microphone. So it's not one specific scenario, but multiple scenarios that we're looking at. So specifically about the earpieces right now, there's already some protection that's integrated to these delegate stations. Effectively, every time we turn this microphone on, the volume goes down on this particular earpiece to minimize the risk of this happening. Now, accidents sometimes happen where sometimes we have some surface here and we plug into the wrong delegate station, and some human error aspects can occur that cause these incidents to happen. That's why the promotion and awareness aspect of things is very important, and that's why we've started collectively with the Translation Bureau working on ways to promote that and explain more the situation in which these items can occur. Should it happen, there's still integrated protection downstream for the interpreters through the console that prevents a sudden peak of volume will be stopped to prevent that to cause ear damage. So there's multiple layers of this and not just one. And also in the chamber, for example, we've replaced the earpieces this summer to make sure that they have produced not as, the loudness level is not as loud, to less chances of pickup. So we're trying to tap on many fronts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gertson. Madame de Bellefeuille, à vous la parole.
Over to you, Madame de Bellefeuille. Thank you very much. I have some questions for the Translation Bureau and also for the committee or the group that manages committee meetings. So first question, Mr. Laporte, in your opening remarks, which I really appreciated, it's great, of course, to hear some good news in spite of everything. But I am still concerned because you were very transparent where you said in spite of the efforts undertaken by you, those who are being hired cannot offset those who are retiring. There's never a surplus. You're always on the brink of disaster. You're able to avoid it. You're able to maintain the level of recruitment to which you gave a commitment to the House, so to have 57 events per week. But in spite of all of these efforts, there are more people retiring than those who are actually joining your team. And I know that you're going to continue with all of your recruitment and hiring efforts, but it's important to know if you're going to stick to these 2 exams per year. Is that going to be your new usual practice? You've done it this year, but as it's just allowing you to meet your commitments and not go into a surplus situation? Are you planning to have 2 or 3 exams per year so that you're able to have a quicker pipeline of interpreters coming on board? Thank you for that question, Chair. In terms of annual exams, the fact that we've introduced this second exam has really helped, because perhaps candidates that didn't succeed in June may perhaps pass in November. So that's a good practice. Doing more than that, well, there's a limited pool. There's just 2 universities that have a master's conference interpretation program, so we're not necessarily going to have more candidates than that. But we're really doubling down in terms of our recruitment company to try and bring in people who perhaps would not have been interested in the past to explore possible jobs with the Translation Bureau. So we're doing everything we can to find new candidates, but our capacity is not falling off. It's important to remember that we're at the level of interpretation at pre-pandemic with 1,500 hours of interpretation which have been provided to the House. So when we situate this within the overall context, in spite of all the efforts being deployed in terms of safety and recruitment and accreditation tests, we have been able to maintain our capacity. But we do also realise that the members would like to have more meeting hours, and so we're very much working that. So basically, in the future, my intention is to maintain 2 accreditation tests. And even if we haven't had a high number of candidates this summer, it's the first time we were doing that, perhaps we'll have more in the future. You were talking about maintaining capacity. As you've said this week, there's several parliamentary activities, parliamentary committees that have actually been cancelled because of a lack of capacity, a lack of interpreter capacity, perhaps a lack of meeting rooms. The idea is actually to increase our capacity. It's great you're maintaining it, which means that you're not falling below your commitments. But I think that we have to recruit more people so that you can actually provide what we need to do our work. And for the moment, we don't have what we need. So we really need to be assured that you're working to increase the number of active interpreters to be able to support all of our work. As you know, the procedural committee is not meeting because the board is meeting. I find that completely unacceptable. Perhaps it suits some people that that's the case, but for me, it's really not acceptable. So with the pilot project now, it's a bit confusing for me. You made a commitment to provide 57 events, and then you're adding another 2 events per day. So that would take us up to 65 events. Is that correct? So as of the 20th of November, parliamentarians will be able to count on 65 events with the commensurate interpreter capacity. Thank you for that question, Chair. In terms of events, and here I'll turn to Mr. MacDonald to go into the details. I can talk about the number of hours of interpretation we're going to offer. We offer 160 hours, and we're going to add in another 16 hours with RSI, remote simultaneous interpretation. So an additional 16 hours per week. So instead of 160 per week, we'll now be at 176 per week. And so that's more than just maintaining the status quo. There is an increase in the number of hours by 10%. As Mr. MacDonald said, that's to try and stabilise operations. And I hope that we will be able to not have these interruptions and cancellations of meetings. We know that that's very disturbing, and we're working closely with the House administration on this pilot project. We're finding our hopes on that. But of course, once again, it is not a magic bullet, a magic solution. It will allow us to stabilise the number of hours of interpretation offered and perhaps avoid certain interruptions and allow for some extensions. But of course, we've got certain interpreters that are out of the National Capital Region working on this, but it's not going to create more interpreters here. Mr. Laporte, the last question for you, and then after that, it will be Mr. MacDonald.
You wrote to the interpreters telling them that you have honoured your commitments following complaints that were made regarding working conditions. And there was a study. The National Research Council participated, as well as experts throughout the world. So it was found that after all the tests, it was found that quality requirements are being met at the house. What concerns me? Well, I'm very happy that we have obtained such results because we needed evidence, scientific evidence to rely on to assess the situation at the house administration with all its equipment. Now that we know that, my question is, there were injuries and accidents at the Senate concerning interpreters. And I know what we are doing as a House administration team. I commend the work done by Mr. Obey and Mr. McDonald to improve the health and safety of our interpreters here. But is the Senate following the good practices developed by the administration? When interpreters use equipment at the Senate, are they getting injured more? Because I think we share the same pool of interpreters. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We have the same rigor and discipline at the House of Commons and the Senate. We have excellent collaboration with the Senate and the House. So there have been a lot of reduced hours for virtual meetings. So there have been a lot of progress made. There are protocols that were established. Sometimes there are slight variations, but it's the same stringency that's being applied. The director of well-being of interpreters is also working with the Senate and the House administration. What do we do for the House of Commons? The same improvements that we implement here are implemented at the Senate, so we have excellent collaboration. I have another question. The system at the Senate, is it comparable to the one here? Is it the same quality? Were the tests done as well? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we also had some tests done at the Senate. Tests were done at the Senate and the House. We have the same equipment. They are responsible for their own investment plan when it comes to modernization of their equipment and maintenance. But that being said, it's the same services. We offer the services. We operate the meeting rooms, just as we do here. Talking about quality of the system, is it the same? Yes, it's the same. It's the same quality. Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Laporte. Mr. Chair, if you would allow me, I would like to put one or two questions to Mr. McDonald. The pilot project, how would your team manage these two events, these two additional events per day? How are you going to be able to decide whether a committee needs to extend or not? How are you going to manage this situation? Thank you, Chair. The whips have to take that decision. They have to decide on how they want to use resources, including interpretation resources. What we propose is that remote interpreters be used for specific committees, at least up till adjournment for Christmas. And then we start looking into how we could optimize resources after the holidays as well. As I stated before, the idea is that if we have remote interpreters working for the same committees, the interpreters will be more at ease with the content of meetings. It will be easier for members of the committee to also familiarize themselves with the process. So for the next, for the first 4 or 6 weeks when we start, so that way we'll be able to maintain those resources. If there are requests for other meetings or extensions, we will then use interpreters who are on the spot who could help with such meetings. So that is really for, well, so you are going to be more agile. You'll be able to have on hand more resources to handle your day-to-day activities. And so the idea is to be able to have more flexibility to meet the needs that arise every day and to be able to continue meetings, to add meetings. We will see if it's always possible to do so, but we'll do what we need to maximize the use of resources. Mr. Chair, last question. I've looked at the dashboard. I know that is a lot of work for you. I know that has enabled us to see all the efforts you've made to obtain the results you've obtained. We know that there's a ceiling of about 65 people, 66% of people testifying remotely. We know that, testifying in person. We know that we need to do more to have people appear. The whips have done their job well. We have already seen that in the House of Commons, there are hardly any MPs who are appearing virtually to take the floor. That has done a great lot of difference. So everybody is making an effort, but more efforts need to be done. At 66%, we should be able to go beyond 70%. In your game plan, are you thinking of ways that we could increase witnesses appearing in person? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the clerks do share this information with the committee chairs. We have already shared this information with committee chairs as well. If a committee indicates a preference for having witnesses in person, that is something that the clerk could communicate. Ultimately, the standing orders indicate that it's up to the witnesses to appear in person or virtually. But if a committee expresses the desire for witnesses to appear in person, the clerks would communicate that with the witnesses, knowing that they always have the option to appear remotely or not. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I will not deal with this today because it's not on the agenda, but since Mr. Laporte is here with us, I would like to mention that at the Bloc Québécois, we've noticed that there are some problems of translation from French into English when it comes to some documents, from English to French when it comes to some documents translated that we receive. So we are not sure of the source, but I would like that be added. We would like to have an update on the situation, maybe before Christmas. How are requests for translation made? What are the deadlines? Are there some hiccups? Because when we compare translations, we realize that there are some problems. But I don't know if that originates from the department or the translation bureau because there's a lack of resources. Is it a problem of translation capacity at the translation bureau? So it may be interesting for us to have an update on that, if you may. Excellent suggestion. We'll come back to that during one of our meetings. To conclude, as you know, maybe Mark is new, but the course and quality of interpreters and interpretation has been something that I take seriously for the past 4 years now. I know that many people were fed up hearing me talk about this, but I would like to thank the House administration because as an MP and member of the board, I feel that the House administration has done a good job. No stone has been left unturned to improve the situation. In my opinion, the situation is not perfect. There are still improvements to be made. There are still some problems in some committee rooms, but Mr. McDonald's team, Mr. Obey's team, the Translation Bureau have all worked very hard with documentation. They have tried to improve their work. They have challenged themselves. It's not easy. So I really want to thank all these people for their hard work, knowing that it is clear that there are still efforts to be made, and we count on them to continue their work. And so on behalf of Mr. Obey, Mr. McDonald, the Translation Bureau, thank you for your comments, Madame de Belfeld. The concerns that are raised around this table are always taken seriously, and that is why they are working very hard to improve the situation, to make sure that all MPs can exercise their privilege as should be the case. Thank you very much. I think we have, Madam Kala?
to mention on this. I'd like to again echo Madame de Bellefeuille's comments and thank the team for coming here and for making this presentation. It was very well received. Why don't we take a minute to trade up places to start up on item number 4, Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians. And we have 2 guests with us, Monsieur Léo Duguay, as well as Mr. Matt DeCourcy. Bon, mais bienvenue au bureau de régie
Welcome to the Board of Internal Economy.
Internal Economy, Monsieur Duguay, Mr. DeCourcy. La parole est à vous.
Bon, ben, merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before I start, I would also like to acknowledge the fact that we are on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. It's an honor to be back around this table with some of my former colleagues. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to engage with you today.
Leo and I here. My name's Matt DeCourcy. For those who I didn't have the pleasure of serving with, I served as the Member of Parliament for Fredericton from 2015 to 2019. Joined the board of the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians in early 2021, and just this past June assumed the chair of the association. Joined today by my friend and colleague, our President Emeritus, Léo Duguay, former Member of Parliament in the Winnipeg area and has decades of venerable service to Canadians that he can speak more about after my opening remarks. The third member of our team who was intending to be here today is our immediate past president, Ms. Dorothy Doby, former Member of Parliament as well in the Winnipeg area. She is returning from other activities and was unable to be here, but was certainly fundamental in helping prepare this presentation and working with the administration of the Clerk's Office and of the House of Commons to help us prepare for this exchange today. We don't intend to take too much of your time. We know that you're all busy, and in many ways that's the point of why we're here. As you elected parliamentarians carry on your fundamental duties to help move the country forward, to ensure that legislation is passed in the House of Commons, to serve your constituents, and to attend your partisan activities. You have at your disposal a roster of over 1,000 living former parliamentarians from across the partisan spectrum who continue to want to engage and serve Canadians and who are there to support you in the important endeavor of supporting, promoting, and safeguarding the institutions of democracy and Parliament in Canada. And if I might, I think those 2 institutions can use all the support, promotion, and safeguarding in this day and age. For those who aren't aware, the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians exists because of an act of Parliament that was passed unanimously by the House of Commons and in the Senate in 1996. We exist by statute with a clear mandate to serve the institutions of Parliament and democracy in both Canada and abroad, to provide nonpartisan support to parliamentarians and to the government, to foster collegiality amongst former parliamentarians and strengthen and enrich our relationship with senators and members of Parliament. And we do that while looking out for the best interests and needs of all former members. Simply put, to fulfill our mandate, we do what we can. We hold outreach and engagement activities that inform members of what's going on in the lives of their colleagues, and we bring them together from time to time. We do what we can to support the transition out of public office for many members of Parliament, a time in their lives that can be wrought with emotional, physical, and financial stresses, and we try to do the best to support them. And we hold activities to support democracy and Parliament, primarily in Canada with young Canadians and abroad and around the world with young and burgeoning democracies. But quite frankly, we struggle and we fall well short of the value, importance, and the potential impact that we could have to fulfill the statute that asks us to fulfill a certain mandate. We don't have the resources required to properly serve our members and you parliamentarians. So we come to you with a request for a funding increase that we think is reasonable, that has been well thought out and worked on by former members of Parliament from across different party stripes, that has been worked on with House administration and members of the clerk's office, and that has been had a lot of thought put into it to identify the best way to meet the shortfall that we feel we have and meet the needs of our members. We have a request that asks for funding to be phased in over a number of 4 years that will allow our association to properly fulfill our legislated mandate, allow us to create true organizational capacity to support our members, increase our ability to support incoming and exiting members of Parliament, and most importantly, to help us help you safeguard the institutions of democracy and Parliament in Canada and abroad. Alors, merci beaucoup encore une fois.
Once again, thank you. I'll give the floor to Leo, who will tell you about our activities with our colleagues in the United States and in Europe. Thank you very much, Matt. I would like to sincerely thank you for inviting us here today. To start, I would like to talk about the life cycle of parliamentarians. When I was a member of Parliament, Greg Fergus was a page. See the cycle: page, MP, Speaker of the House, and one day he is going to be a former parliamentarian. As Matt likes to say, I hope that when you become a former parliamentarian, it will be of your own volition, because some members of parliament become former parliamentarians because the electorate is sometimes cruel.
Presentation was first made, there wasn't a question about what the United States former members and the European members do. And I wanted to point that out. The Americans are fond of saying that they do not receive money from Congress. And in fact, that is correct, technically. However, the workaround is simple. The association, when the Bundestag former members or Bundestag current members meet with members of Congress in Washington, the organization and support of those activities is carried out by the Association of Former Members, a job which in Canada is done by some of our colleagues in the bureaucracy. The other thing that Americans do, which we don't do, is that Americans have different rules for political contributions. So when the Bundestag meets with members of Congress, corporate entities are invited to attend, and these corporate entities become supporting partners of the association, and they pay an annual fee to be supporting members. So while it is technically correct that the Congress does not give funds directly to the association, they provide considerable sums in an alternative way by hiring the association to perform functions which in Canada are bureaucracy functions. The European members of former Parliament have a different structure. Their support provides to the association an executive director, at an assistant deputy minister level, and 2 other staff, as well as all the support that is required for their association. The former members of the European Parliament also administer the pension plan for former members, and there's a source of revenue which goes to them from doing that job. All of this to point out that the request that we've made to you is not out of line with what sister organizations in the world do, and it isn't designed to create weird and wonderful travel activities for our members. It's designed really to do a couple of really simple things. We have members of Parliament who are diselected or who retire. And I think the tendency to believe that those who retire have an easy life is not altogether true. We can tell you from years of experience of having picked up our colleagues that the movement from being a high-profile member of Parliament in a public capacity to a person that almost everyone ignores in one day is traumatic for a lot of people. It's not traumatic for everyone, but it's traumatic for a lot of people. So that's part one. The second part of what we do is that many of our former members of Parliament are becoming younger and younger. And remember why all of you entered public life. You entered public life to serve the public. And just because you get defeated or move out as a member of Parliament doesn't mean that you've lost that objective. We all want to serve the public that elected us, and we want to continue to serve. And the act that Parliament passed in 1996 was designed to permit our association to do that. And over the period of time, support for us has dwindled. Never mind met the standards that we've put forth. And we're not asking for a free handout. We would simply ask that you endorse the proposal in principle and let us work with the administration to try to figure out how we could best accomplish those things that the Act requires us to do.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Duguay. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you to both of you, Mr. Corsi and Mr. Duguay. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions or comments at this juncture? Madam Finlay?
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. This is a tough time for a lot of Canadians, and I understand the call to service. Having won elections and lost elections, that is the will of the public at the time, but I do understand your comments about wanting to continue to serve. The question is, at what level, doing what things, and how much that should be supported by public funds. And I do note that a year ago, the association was requesting basically double the funding you're requesting now, but it's still a seven-fold increase in the value of support. So I do have questions because I'm not persuaded that this is the best use of funds. One of the things I was wondering about was how has the size of the association's membership changed over the years? Has there been any significant growth over the past decade, for instance? Can you advise me on that?
Thanks very much for the question, and I think for the benefit of everybody in this room, Mr. Chair and committee members, I think we realize and are fully aware of the challenges that this institution has to deal with on a daily basis, keeping in mind the challenges that ordinary Canadians face in their daily lives. I think one of the benefits that our association and a potential membership of 1,000 living former members offer is a dedicated desire to continue to ensure that this institution, Parliament, and the system of government that it sits beneath, democracy, is upheld, and that its values are able to be imparted amongst folks in their daily lives. I know that our membership has gone through ebbs and flows. Certainly during COVID, it was more and more challenging to reach out and ensure the enrollment and retainment of members in the association. I think we sit at just shy of 300 members currently as a part of the association. Leo could speak to the historical trajectory of what that's looked like over time. But the fact is we don't have the organizational and we don't have the capacity to sustain our outreach and our ability to go and seek out potential members, engage them in activities, and organize enough meaningful activities for them to feel as though there's import in what we do. And we have a board that's committed to ensuring that we increase those opportunities for those 1,000 potential members out there.
The membership has ranged as high as 425 on years. That's what it was before the pandemic. Every time that our membership ebbs and flows, we've organized a volunteer telephone campaign to try to get people to join the membership. I would point out that one of the significant issues is that of the former members of Parliament, I don't, and hold me don't hold me to the number, but the last number I had was something of the order of 40% of people who serve in Parliament never qualify for a pension. That's a significant number. So the idea that members of Parliament retire from here and live the life of Riley is not really quite true. Many of them have a difficulty in reintegrating. So I just hasten to add one point. I've had the opportunity of meeting with my colleagues in the U.S. former members of Congress and European members, and one of the things they've had that we've not had is incredible support from current members. We've had difficulty in getting you to help us out. And it isn't just about the money. It's about you coming to our events to help us out, to help the work that we do. I mean, former Speaker Scheer, of all the people in this room, has the most experience of anyone that I can see. He and I attended probably 40 events together over the 5 years that I was president of the association. So if you ask why 5 years, there isn't exactly a competition for these jobs. Most members are happy to let somebody else do it, as I think, frankly, in speaking to you, you're also happy to let somebody else do it. And I hasten to add that our bureaucracy does incredibly good work for members of Parliament. And the line, though, gets stopped when we say that your work and their work is about members of Parliament, not former members of Parliament, which is what we do. And there's an incredible job in reintegrating. I can tell you at least 15 or 20 former members that we have picked up off the ground. And some of you here will know Mark Holland, I think, made an example some time ago. We have cases of attempted suicide. We have cases of depression. And the system that you have in place right now for members of Parliament stops pretty well after you become an ex-member. And I just want to remind that this is not a demand of give us the money and we'll go away. What we're saying here is these are the things that we think we can do. We think they're worthwhile doing. And our request to you is let us work with the department, come up with a refined plan. When we submitted this to you a year ago, it was just a draft. And my impression was that we would work with your staff, that you would say, go work with the staff and refine it. So we've worked with staff now and have refined it. And it needs some more refinement. This is not a request, give us the money, we'll go away. It's saying, here are things we want to do, here are things we can do, help us do those things, and we'll work with your staff and come back with a fixed, hard-line budget, which this is not.
Thank you for that answer, and I certainly understand some of the problems of reintegration, to use your word, when parliamentarians find themselves out of office. I understand the idea of collegiality among former parliamentarians, but it's a lot of money that's being asked for. So one of my questions would be, do you have the intention to revive your fundraising efforts, which the pandemic, I believe, put on hold? How much were you able to raise annually prior to the pandemic? Do you have any plans in that regard?
So for a period of about 10 years, I was responsible for almost all of the fundraising efforts. And we were able to raise over a 10-year period something of the order of $1.5 million gross. And we used that money to fund our association as best we could. The pandemic brought this to an absolute halt, and a number of other things have conspired to make all fundraising on a volunteer basis difficult. We had a process whereby we held an annual dinner here in Ottawa. Say some of you have attended that, and but it's becoming harder and harder and harder to have corporations grant you money for purposes that they are not sure about. So we're quite prepared to do that. Matter of fact, I don't know, Mr. President, but I'd make you an offer. If you will match us dollar for dollar, we'll go right back to the fundraising, because we've had this is really I'm telling you, raising money is, I've done it, it's very, very hard work. And it's hard to go get an association of volunteers together to go beg corporations to contribute money for the objectives we have here, which I remind, these objectives were not our objectives. They were set out in an act of Parliament. So yes, we're prepared to do our part in fundraising, but this would be basic funding from which we could do the rest.
If I might, Ms. Finley, just to finish off and help respond to that question, I think our association is more than open to partnerships with a range of different civic-minded groups. I know that this board have other organizations who come to them seeking funding. We'd be more than happy to partner with them. That would be point one. Point two on that same train of thought is that we have a legislated mandate. We exist by an act of Parliament, which I think differs us a little bit from some of those other organizations to come. If we had the funding, we would be more than willing to work with civic literacy organizations, parliamentary interns, teachers associations. That's at the core of our mandate, and that's work that we want to do more of. Right now, we struggle to, because we don't have the organizational infrastructure in place to properly run a Parliament to Campus program. It's gone in fits and starts. We don't have the proper infrastructure in place to help support the fundraising, which brings me to my third point. Some of us are younger parliamentarians who need to go out and work full time in the world and raise raise families. We can't undertake that sort of fundraising activities, certainly not without the support of a fully functioning office to help backstop us.
Just two more. One of the objectives you have laid out here, which I think is a good one, is helping with election monitoring work. But it's my understanding that you did, at least at one time, have international development grants to help in that work. So I'm just wondering, have those grants been cut off or are they ongoing?
So about 10 or 12 years ago, don't hold me to the date, CETA granted us $500,000 for the development of election monitoring internationally through an institute which has now morphed into the Global Democracy Initiative, which I currently chair, but it's been dead for about 5 years. Canada provided all the money, the Europeans provided zero, and the Americans provided zero. And the field of election monitoring internationally is very, very crowded. But in Canada, we have a group which you fund. The name is, what's the name of the... Canadem, which the Government of Canada funds. This is the organization Parliament has designated to run election monitoring. We were trying to do some international stuff with our colleagues abroad. It was a wonderful initiative, but it died for lack of funding. It died because we tried to raise money internationally, but the Americans and the Europeans were not very, very cooperative. But the only reason it existed was because the government had granted $500,000 from CETA.
Madam Finley, last question.
Yeah, my last question just is the promotion of democracy, promotion of parliamentarianism is certainly a parliamentary function. We do that as part of our mandates. So I'm just trying to understand and struggling a bit with how former parliamentarians would add value with respect to those broad ambitions more than parliamentarians are doing on a regular basis.
Well, I'll just add, you don't have time to do the job. You've got a full-time job doing a whole bunch of other things. I mean, I do. I've lived your life, and I didn't have any time left over after I did my House of Commons committee work, constituency work, public events. I had very little time to go do that. We have the time, we have the energy, we have the background, and we add one other dimension. When you're a sitting member of Parliament, you, of necessity, have to have a partisan edge. Those of us who are former members are still partisan, but the edge is off. So I've done a lot of events across Canada, most of them, by the way, at my own expense, with colleagues from other political parties. and we're able to bring a view that says, here's why democracy is important, here's why Parliament's important, but it's not important because I opposed you to get elected. That's a piece that we don't have anymore that can bring something pretty substantial. So my last point is, you do the job, but you don't have time to do that, and you still have to get elected. I have the time, and I don't have to get elected. Thank God.
Maybe the final thing
Mr.
I'll add there, Mr. Chair, is that in 1996 the Parliament unanimously sought fit to provide former parliamentarians with a statutory mandate to go out and enrich the promotion and support and safeguarding of democracy. And I would think that parliaments ever since would see the benefit, certainly this day and age, would see the benefit in having folks without that partisan edge who aren't out seeking to be reelected to help educate primarily young Canadians, but all Canadians and our partners abroad about the importance and benefit of these functioning styles of our functioning style of government. So again, I come back to the fact that we have a legislated mandate to do this, and we don't have the funds to fulfill that mandate that exists in statute.
Thank you, Mr. DeCourcy. We have three other interventions so far on the list. I have Madame Gould, I have Mr. Julien, and I have Madame de Bellefeuille.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for that. And thanks to our guests for being here and for all the work that you do on behalf of former parliamentarians. I think what I found particularly compelling about what you were saying is the need to support the transition from being a parliamentarian to a former parliamentarian, and certainly the challenges that comes with. And so I guess I have a couple of questions, and I think in the interest of time I'll try to group them together and maybe come back afterwards. But the part of your proposal that I find very interesting is the mentorship program. And I'm wondering if you could spend a little bit of time talking about that and why that's important. We do a lot of work to onboard parliamentarians, and then I fortunately have not yet been in the position of deciding not to, or having been decided not to have been reelected yet, but I know that day will come at some point. But I understand from former colleagues how big a shift that is, and that you go from having the resources and the support of the House of Commons to effectively being on your own. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you envision in terms of supporting former parliamentarians in that way with the transition back to, civilian life, if you will. And then the other question that I had was just with regards to the staff support. If, let's say, for example, you were provided by the House administration with staff support and perhaps the mentorship program coordinator, would that provide you enough support to be able to fundraise for the other very laudable objectives that you have? And is there a world in which, that is something that would provide that stability for the association and the numerous members that you have in order to pursue some of those other objectives?
Thank you for grouping those questions together, and hopefully we could have some brief responses.
Sure. Thanks very much, Ms. Gould. And Mr. Chair, as someone who has gone through the transition out of public office fairly recently, I can attest to the fact that the supports offered by the administration of the House of Commons and of Parliament are first class, and we would be advocates of always beefing up those supports that the administrative team offer. What is lacking, and why I feel so fortunate to have been given the call by colleagues of Leo at the time at the Association of Former Parliamentarians, was that gave me a place to feel as though I could continue to provide service for Canadians and continue to contribute and quite frankly find my way back to a collegial engagement like this with you folks. Leo has been part in the past of attempts to pair former members who have spent some time out of office with immediately leaving members to help provide them with some guidance, whether it be professional, whether it be personal, whether it be helping them with mental health supports, which would be something that I would see reason to further engage with this committee about the mental health supports offered to leaving parliamentarians. The second part of your question, Ms. Gould, was about the staff complement and perhaps the mentorship as a good start for this organization.
Yeah, and then because you were talking about the difficulty and the challenge around fundraising without having that staff support, and so I recognize and thank you, Mr. Duguay, for sharing, the pretty incredible fundraising efforts that you were able to do before the pandemic, and so if that is a source of stability almost to enable some of that fundraising for the other activities that you might want to fund.
Yeah, if we had some full-time leadership in our own office, we would be able to take on a whole range of different partnership opportunities, whether they be seeking financial support or engaging in other democracy-building activities with the range of organizations out there. Maybe Leo, you can speak a little bit more about how it's worked in the past.
So, I don't know, 15 years ago, I undertook to run some fundraising dinners, and we raised enough money on an annual basis to hire an executive director. And the executive director was able to help us with the fundraising. Someone needs to be there in the office to handle, all of the administrative things that are involved with booking a hall, arranging speakers, transportation, all of these kinds of things. So it's a little bit like a pyramid. If you give us some support, we can help ourselves. To Ms. Finley's point a while ago about the 7-fold increase, if you gave us half of that, we would multiply that 10-fold. If you give us the support that we're asking in some form, we can do a lot better job. But without your support, we're stuck in a quandary. And it's not everybody who has fundraising experience. I'm getting to the point where I've done a lot of it, and I'm not as anxious today to do all of that work as I was 15 years ago. And it's very hard to find people who know that background. I'm willing to train others and help them, but it's just not there. This last point on the mentorship, we've spent a lot of time trying to talk with people, call them and ask them. Believe it or not, the day they leave office, they're not ready. They're not ready to look for support. You will see this one day. You will be in shock. I'm telling you, you will be in shock. Until you recover, then you can go ask for help. But the early period, and what we tried to do is call these people and say, hey, I'm one of your former colleagues. I'm here. If you need anything, call me back. And in the course of the years, when people call back, the engagement starts, we're able to help, but we don't really have the support to do things like the mental health component that Matt was talking about.
If we had the infrastructure in the office to keep track of 6, 12, 18 months out how former members were doing, then I think we would see a much greater engagement in the association and much more potential to build, our fundraising coffers and to do more work in partnership with other organizations across the country.
Thank you. Mr. Julian.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I found a number of your comments very compelling, particularly when we talk about former members. And I think Mark Holland going public with what he experienced as an ex-member of Parliament showed tremendous courage, but it also, I think, it exposed what we know privately to be a reality for so many ex-members of Parliament, and the very abrupt transition from elected life to being defeated is very hard on anyone, and we've all seen and we've all lived through that experience with our colleagues who've been defeated. So I find that argument compelling about providing in a more structured way supports former members of Parliament. I also find compelling your argument about democracy. Our democracy is under threat. We have just gone through a process of putting in place a public inquiry to combat Russian and Chinese foreign interference. There is widespread disinformation. There is spreading hate. These are all very strong warning signs that we can't take our democracy for granted. And we've seen with our American cousins how close they came to a violent coup d'etat. It is not something that we should take lightly at all. I note the figures that you have here. Mr. Duguay, you also mentioned that you were looking for agreement in principle around the budget figures, and I agree that this is a significant expansion. So that is one thing that makes me hesitate a bit. But when you say endorsement in principle, is it because you think that some of the elements within this this proposal would actually be considered as in-kind contributions? Is that you currently receive in-kind contribution of office space and other supports? Is your intention not so much to meet some of the sort of draft components of this budget, but to look to the House administration and other sources so that the financial the financial outlay would actually be much less than some of the figures that are given here?
When we first drafted this 2 years ago, it was drafted by volunteers without the expertise to lay out some of this. This iteration, we worked with your staff. Jeremy and his group were Eric and his group were helpful in trying to refine these numbers. And I think what we're saying is these numbers are not precise enough to say to you, give us this budget as it is. What we're saying is, if you agree that these are the kinds of things we can do, then let's go the next step and work to refine them specifically and come back with a finite, exact budget, because I think this is not exact.
If you look in the budget page, there's a note in there somewhere, Mr. Julian, explaining that the first 2 years have been rather fine-pointed with the support of the clerk's office. The next 2 years are a bit more notional, and we would seek, your guidance and your support to perhaps lay out a more precise plan as we move forward, understanding that the first thing that we need is a fully functioning office that can help us undertake these activities, and as we've discussed with other colleagues on the panel here, perhaps look for some partnership opportunities that could seek funding elsewhere.
So for today, what you're looking for from us, from the Board of Internal Economy, is to give a green light to look at further at ways that the association could be supported in its push to support former members, to educate and provide more outreach around protecting and enhancing our democracy and other democracy building components. So we wouldn't be approving any budget today. We would just be giving a green light for further discussions that would ultimately come back to this board.
I think that's a reasonable approach. What we brought you today was after months and months of work amongst our board and with the support of the office here. So we think it's reasonable, but we're also reasonable enough to know that you have other checks and balances that you need to consider. And if there was a nod of support in principle that you were interested in supporting our organization further, we'd be more than happy to continue this conversation.
If you were to give us the staff support we need, I think we can go from there.
Sorry, so what does that mean? I just want to be clear about what we are being asked to do or asked to look at today.
I'm not sure that correct. Matt may be more on top of this. If we were dead sure of the preciseness of these numbers, we'd be saying, please approve them. But I think, for instance, in the year one of building organizational capacity, staff support of 337,000, that's a relatively good number. And if you were to start with that and then let us build the budget over a protracted period, the problem we have all the time is trying to run this budget structure with a bunch of volunteers. And this time we're much better than we were a year ago because your staff has helped us out.
Sure.
Just on that last comment, my understanding was that the numbers in year 1 and 2 are, for each bucket, are over a couple of years. That's not for 1 year. Is that correct?
The year 1 numbers would be the ask in the first year. The year 2 numbers would be in addition to the year 1 numbers coming on board in year 2. I think what we're saying is if the initial year 1 allotment was agreed to in principle, even if there were further discussions that need to be had about the exact dollar allocation, we would be very much in favor of having those conversations. The year 2 request for the mentorship program support has also been fine-pointed with members of the administration. Year 3 and 4 are more notional. We think there are the types of activities that our association should be engaging in, but we understand that first we need to have the organizational capacity of staff to help us undertake those initiatives.
Madame de Bellefeuille, à vous la parole.
Thank you very much. Sincerely, Mr. Duquet and Mr. Ducourcey, I find you very brave to show up here today. This is a testament to the fact that you are convinced about defending the interest of your association. You came here to meet us. At the last BOIE meeting, we refused to increase the budget of parliamentary associations from 400,000 so that parliamentarians should do their work abroad. So when we look at the economy, it's not a good position we find ourselves in. Now, after listening to your arguments, I'm a former parliamentarian who came back to parliamentary life. I was defeated twice, so I don't understand what you're talking about. At the same time, I find that your mandate is broad. You have embraced lots of responsibilities. Since 2017, the House administration has overhauled its approach. A lot of staff has been recruited. More human resources were recruited. I do remember that when I lost in 2011, I was able to use a coaching service, and I did receive great services from the House administration to be able to go through that electoral defeat, which is never easy for anyone. Sincerely, I think it's important to have an association. I believe that. Am I convinced that broadening your mandate is relevant? When I lost, I sought refuge with my former colleagues. I did not seek the help of the association. I believe that the friends we make, those are the kind of things that help us during a transition. But I do agree with you that former parliamentarians have an experience that could help in supervising elections abroad, for example, representation abroad, like in the Council of Europe. But is this association more like a brotherhood of parliamentarians? But I agree that you have to exist and you need what you need to do the minimum. But I'm not convinced that what you are asking for is the right budget. Now, with the discussions, you can see where we are headed. If we do agree that you come back with a more realistic budget, maybe with a smaller mandate, maybe we could go along with that. But I'm not a member of parliament that minces her words. I know that you are feeling that we are not very enthusiastic approving your recommendations, but I do find the role of the association very important. But I think you need to reduce your mandate and maybe find something that will be less expensive for you. I don't know how we could better help you. Maybe, as Mr. Gillian said, you could come back with a smaller ask, and then we could see how the House administration can help you. Thank you very much for the questions, Madame de Belfay. I think it's important to focus on the fact that we are not asking for a broadening of our mandate. Our mandate already exists in the legislation that was adopted here in 1996 unanimously by the House. What we are asking for are resources to enable us implement the mandate that was adopted. Anything to add? Indeed, your choice of words is very interesting. Today, the provincial association in Quebec is called an amicale. They have a more friendly role than ours. Ours is a service association. I accept that for many MPs, they have had a similar experience to yours. Many have lost an election. They are supported by their families and colleagues, and everything goes well. And the House of Common Services are high-quality services. But for many other former parliamentarians, that's not the case. So for you, everything worked well, 100%, but that was not the same for everyone else in the country. So we are not trying to broaden our mandate. I talked about associations in the United States and Europe. I talked about what they did. But frankly, our association focuses on Canada and young Canadians. For activities abroad, lots of them were subject to cuts because of lack of resources. So the mandate has not been broadened. We're just trying to do what we do well. Thank you very much, Madame Lebelfay. We have a short question from Mr. McKinnon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. We have 3 whips at the Board of Internal Economy. I think that the research and literature that has been done amongst parliamentarians and former parliamentarians has proven that mental health issues when it comes to transitioning to private life after political life do exist, be it your association or someone else. Democracy needs to prioritize those activities. If we think that democracy is what the trouble, it is an essential function, in my opinion, particularly since research has shown that mentorship programs are things we should expect when we are elected, be it for the running of parliament, the running of a constituency office, the typical day in the life of a parliamentarian. I think that all will benefit from wise advice from people who have gone through that experience. Entry and exit from Parliament, those are the basic functions of the experience of former parliamentarians who want to continue rendering service. Yes, the functioning of such an association should be constantly supported, I believe. So without speaking to figures or all of the proposals that have been made, I think that if colleagues agree, we would ask you to come back with a budget that focuses on those 2 functions and the possibility of collecting funds for other important activities contained in your proposal, at least for now, should not be receiving public funds.
But if we can concentrate on the running of the association and also drop a program for the entry and the exit of parliamentarians, I think that would be an elegant solution, and we'd be very grateful to your association to be able to improve these two aspects, the coming in and the going out of members. I'd just like to make a quick comment on that. When you enter Parliament, and it's done with officials, of course, they cannot talk about the political side of things with you. So one element that's missing when you come in would be to work with you and colleagues and say, look, this is what happens in a caucus, for example, from a political point of view, or this is what happens in the cut and thrust of Parliament from a political point of view. And the same thing at the exit. The public servant will talk about the sort of clinician type answer and what's going to happen, but they don't talk about your actual spirit, your soul. So these are two things that are missing at the beginning, at the end, and we are in an advantageous position to do that. And as I've said, we have volunteers, we have plenty of volunteers, and they're happy to give of their time on a voluntary basis, but what's missing is the organisation, the organisational support. So mentorship and the organisational side of things, if we could get those 2 points up and running, that would really help us to get through this. Thank you very much. Mr. Scheer.
Very briefly, I think you'll probably find a lot of agreement on what on the aims and the goals, and if we're in an environment where there wasn't kind of the economic reality that Canadians are going through, there are a lot of nice to haves in your proposal. You mentioned the election monitoring space is crowded. So when I hear that, my first thought is, well, then does it need another player, or does it need another entity in that? Is that something that we could, to my colleagues, Mr. McKinnon's point, is that something that we could maybe reshift the focus away from that, if that's already well served with other NGOs or other government supported entities to go do that around the world, and keep the focus more on some of the other topics that you've mentioned?
So on crowded, the international field is very crowded. So I don't think there's a role for us there. On the Canadian field, there is sometimes a role for having more ex-parliamentarians serve in the election monitoring, because as I've often said in a kind of fun way, I've seen just about every shenanigan that anyone can apply in an election over my career. And so we're more able to spot shenanigans than the average university professor. So it's crowded, and we're not looking for an extra role. But in the case of Canada, we might be able to play a better, more efficient role. And if you were to mandate us to do that, you wouldn't be adding funds, you'd be redirecting funds.
Mr. Scheer, thanks very much for the comment. And if I sense you're trying to position yourself with the comments of Mr. McKinnon, I would be in favor of us focusing on those key priorities for our association. I know there are a lot of nice to haves in the world, but two things that I think are not nice to haves are democracy and mental health. And I think our organization can play a key role in help in ensuring that the mental health of exiting parliamentarians is first and foremost in the minds of their colleagues on the outside. And I think with the organizational capacity in our office, we could do a darn good job supporting the important work that you do in democracy building, both at home and abroad.
Colleagues, is there an appetite for what Mr. McKinnon had put on the floor to invite them to refine their proposal on a more focused mandate? Do I see some head nodding around the table? Very good. So be it. Mr. Duguay, Mr. De Courcy, thank you very much for coming. I'll leave you with this. My former boss, who was defeated in an election, he told me that he retired for health reasons. His constituents got sick and tired of him. So with that...
I could give you a list of other reasons if you like.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we have a little bit of time left and for an important two other items on our agenda, one in public, the other in camera. In the public, item number 5, I'm going to turn the mic over to our interim clerk, Mr. Jantz.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As my colleague set up, maybe I'll just say the following in terms of an introduction to this item. As members know, the board is, of course, the point of intersection between members of Parliament, their parties, and, of course, the House of Commons administration. So for this next submission, it's being brought forward by the administration, but it is in response to demands placed upon us by the parties. We fully recognize that it is a substantive business case, but it reflects the substantive change to the manner by which Parliament now operates. Donc, je vais maintenant céder la parole à mes collègues qui vont présenter notre...
So I'll now give the floor to my colleagues to make their presentation and be happy to take your questions.
Monsieur Lebrun.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you.
Stéphane and Paul and I are here this morning to present a business case regarding sustaining the transformation of parliamentary proceedings. As you know, over the past few years, at the request of members, the House administration has transformed its technology and its operations model to expand the ways in which members and Canadians can follow and participate in parliamentary proceedings. Though it was not the only factor, the pandemic was certainly a catalyst for many of those changes. The House had to put in place very quickly a model that would allow us to continue sitting and voting by using technology. A lot of these changes have now become a regular part of working, not just for our proceedings, but for all sorts of different kinds of events, which are now conducted with some form, at least, of video conferencing. The changes are, of course, most pronounced in committees, where now the vast majority of our meetings are webcast, which was not always the case, and contain at least some remote participation. As we heard a little earlier in this meeting, increased remote participation has also had an impact on our interpreters, and the House has had to develop new tools and new processes to ensure their health and safety and to ensure that all can participate in the language of their choice. To support these new requirements, the House has had to make investments in staff and in technology. Staff to offer ongoing support and monitoring, to ensure cybersecurity, to onboard and test witnesses, and to manage a whole series of new processes. There are also capital costs relating to equipment and licensing. These are additional obligations that did not exist only a few years ago. L'administration de la Chambre n'a pas demandé de fonds additionnels.
The Chamber has not asked, or the House administration did not ask for extra resources. There were surpluses because we had reduced activities, and it was also possible to send staff from other projects to fill in, but that is less and less possible because we've gone back to regular activities. So our submission today is not to hire new employees, but to maintain the teams that we've set up over the last few years to keep running these new services. So there are deficits on the admin, the procedures side, because of the additional resources that we've had to engage to support these operations. And even although the House administration is trying to be fiscally prudent by deploying employees elsewhere where it's possible, there is certainly a risk if we have to continue to depend on surpluses and carryovers in order to cover these costs, which have now become permanent.
Different areas in which all of these changes have been made. Si je peux aborder les 4 champs principaux.
So there are 4 main areas: chamber operations, the electronic voting application, committee operations, and then health and safety of interpreters. First of all, chamber operations to allow MPs to participate remotely. We've had to invest in equipment and the support teams which are necessary throughout the meetings to resolve issues that come up, and there's extra tasks for the staff for coordinating communications for the meetings and votes because there's requests for information from members, and they have to liaise all of that with the technical committee. And in average, there has been an increase in the hours of meetings and the frequency of late meetings. The impact of these changes has really had a knock-on effect because we need more staff to support each meeting. And then with the electronic voting system, we have developed an application so that it's possible to vote from anywhere in Canada. So that has led to an increasing number of people participating in each vote. And in order to do that, there has to be support behind the application. There have to be dedicated resources for cybersecurity to ensure the integrity of the system, and also troubleshooting in real time and regular continuous maintenance. And there's also extra tasks for procedural staff when it comes to preparing and managing information that's fed into the application.
Probably most pronounced in committees, where once upon a time most committee meetings were audio only, with a limited number of meetings being televised and mostly in person where if anyone was participating by video conference, they had to travel to a studio that was operated by a third party. Today, the reality is that most public meetings are either webcast or broadcast. Almost all meetings have at least some participants participating by video conference, or at least we have to prepare for a circumstance where anybody could participate by video conference, and they're able to do so from just about any location. Even if one were to do away with the hybrid aspects for members of parliament, it would probably not be feasible to go back to the old model for witnesses. The expectation now for witnesses is that they are able to appear using familiar video conferencing software from their homes or their offices. To ensure adequate sound quality for interpretation, there's a series of extra supports that have had to be put in place. The support requirements for witnesses have increased dramatically, including the shipping of headsets, a series of pre-tests, and ongoing monitoring. There's also challenges in managing the capacity for meetings, which has resulted in longer blocks of committee meetings over the day that creates additional resources pressures. The costs for video conferencing in committees were once upon a time charged to each committee's budget, back when we were using a third party, and that was paid out of the liaison envelope. That is no longer the case, where these costs have been absorbed by the House administration. I will let Stéphane very briefly also touch on what we've done in terms of supporting the interpreters.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Mr. Speaker, Membre de la Régie, I'd just like to expand on two specific drivers for the submission that had a major impact on the administration: financial resources, our human resources, our technologies, and our processes. The first driver that we've been talking about is the change to how we have members and witnesses participate to the parliamentary proceedings. As Jeffrey mentioned, if you recall, pre-pandemic, witnesses had to drive to specific locations, specific facilities that we had in Canada. And through the interconnectivity of these facilities and the parliamentary infrastructure, people were able to participate in the meetings. As part of the pandemic, that was impossible. We had to change the complete model as to how we get members and witnesses to participate as part of the proceedings. And that had a major impact on how we need to actually support the participants. We had to introduce, as Jeffrey talked about, new processes in pre-meetings. We had to have people now pre-test to ensure that people have standardized equipment before they participate in our meetings. We also had to ship equipment so that they had standardized equipment. We had to introduce quality assurance programs during meetings. We have dedicated people now that are requested to be here to ensure that the audio quality are met, and we meet the ISO standards. And we also had to introduce concepts, as we've talked about earlier, for post-meetings so that we can provide dashboards on incidents and continuously improve our environment. And then talking about resources and just the impact that this that change had on the administration, like it used to cost the House administration half a resource to set up a normal meeting pre-pandemic, because most of the meetings were in audio only. Now we require 3 people from a technical perspective just to do the pre-test, to do the online quality. So you can imagine, based on the number of meetings, the impact that it had both financially and from a resources perspective to the institution. Le deuxième grand changement
So there were big changes with the pandemic and the introduction of these technologies. And we received, of course, these directions within the context of the Canadian Labour Code and the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and the Translation Bureau got specific instructions to protect the health and safety of all of the participants within our events. Because of all of these changes, there was a direct impact on the number of resources that we need to use for our meetings. Now we have to do random tests throughout the year to make sure that our equipment meets ISO standards, and we have to do these tests every time we change our infrastructure to guarantee that there's high quality audio that won't actually turn the work environment into a risky one for you, the members, and all the other participants. We also have to establish relationships with centres of audiology to do subjective testing on the sound quality. So there's lots of different initiatives that we've had to develop. We didn't have a choice. We had to do these to ensure the smooth running of the Parliament. Of course, that all has an impact on our financial resources and our processes. And in terms of finance, I'm going to give the floor to Paul, who will give you an idea of what this involves.
Points very quickly. One is the financing, forecasting, inflation, and carry forward. Pour le financement des activités dans le cadre de ce.
So, for funding activities, as Jeffrey has mentioned, this has been funded internally of these activities and with carryover funds. And the budgetary capacity during this period was possible because the running costs, operating costs were lower during COVID. Historic surpluses from the House administration gradually went from $12.1 million in 2021 to then $6.9 million in 2021 to 2022.
Perspective, this year administration alone is forecasting a $610,000 deficit. For this year, we're not seeking additional funds or supplementary for this funding case. We predict costs will continue to escalate in the future, and admin will find itself in a greater deficit. From an inflation perspective, administration bears about $1 million that we absorb in terms of non-salary cost inflation annually, and we've been doing so over the last several years. This has been managed through continuous improvement initiatives at the service level. From a carry-forward perspective, some will refer to it as the reserve. The purpose of that reserve essentially is to finance projects that will support and enhance members' services. And one of the strategies of this submission is to protect these funds and seek funding through the means. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I conclude the presentation on behalf of myself and my colleagues, and we're welcome to answer any questions.
Sur la liste générale, j'ai...
On the general speaking list, I've got Madame Gould. Thank you, Chair.
This item, I'm conscious of the time, and I'm very worried that we won't make it to the final item, which I think is really important. And so I'm just putting it to you for future meeting management. Maybe if we have time limits on some of the items so that we can get to the whole agenda. But I leave that with you. Premièrement, j'aimerais vous remercier énormément.
First of all, I'd really like to give you a heartfelt thanks for the enormous efforts that the House administration has done, particularly during the pandemic. I know that you had to totally turn around the way in which we work, a big transformation. I think it was really excellent for democracy because this means that all members were able to continue to participate in House proceedings. And I think that what Mr. Obey said was correct with the witnesses. With the witnesses, it was not just good during the pandemic, but it's something that has really enriched participation by witnesses in the committees from now on in, because there are lots more people who can actually take part in these meetings who were not able to participate in the past. So well done. We take our hat off to you.
Is really about what Mr. St. George was saying, because in terms of the carry forward, I think we completely support the request for these funds, but would like to see that absorbed by the carry forward given the current context. And it would seem to me, based on your comments, that this is actually what the carry forward would be intended for, is these unforeseen circumstances that support the work of members. And this is exactly the kind of work that would do that. So I think from our perspective, our position would be to say, yes, absolutely, you can spend this money. It's important. It's imperative. And I don't think there's a desire to go backwards in terms of being able to allow members to participate virtually. We saw, in the first few weeks of the House, COVID spread through Parliament quite rapidly. There were many people who got sick, but who were still able to participate through the proceedings virtually. And there are a number of other reasons why we want to enable members to continue to participate virtually, but also for witnesses to be able to engage in that process. And so my proposal would be that we accept this increase in funds and grant that to you, but it be taken from the carry forward. And unless there is a time when that cannot be absorbed to the carry forward, we would invite you to come back so that we could provide funds in extenuating circumstances. But that would be the proposal that I would put on the table. Thank you.
I see no other interventions. Is there a general consensus on that perspective proposed by Madame Gould? Very well. Granted. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we are up against the limit, but we do have one more issue, which is important. Do we have time to take a couple of minutes for that, or do you have previous engagements? Mr. Julian.
Mr. Chair, it's a very important issue. I don't know if we can do justice to it. If it could be the first item at the next meeting, I think there.
We'll do this item in camera first at the next meeting. So we'll set that for the next meeting then, if there's a general agreement.
Agree with that.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.